All right, let's just dive right in. We're going to tackle one of those huge, fascinating questions that's moved from the pages of science fiction into, believe it or not, serious philosophical debate. Are all of us just characters in someone else's cosmic video game? It's a wild thought, I know, but it's one that some very smart people are taking very, very seriously.
And yeah, this isn't just a plot from a movie. This is actually a formal argument, and it was put forward by a philosopher named Nick Bostrom. And what he did really challenges our entire understanding of reality. He basically laid out this logical framework that kind of forces us to confront some pretty startling possibilities about the world we think we know.
So let's start by breaking down the logic that makes this whole idea so darn compelling. It's called the ancestor simulation argument, and it's really built on two simple things: the idea of technological progress and just basic probability.
Okay, so what Bostrom gives us is this trilemma. He says, look, one of these three things has to be true. Option 1, we go extinct before we ever get smart enough to create these simulations. Option 2, we get super advanced, become post-human, but for whatever reason, we're just not interested in simulating our past. Or Option 3, we're almost certainly living in one of those simulations right now. So think about it. If you think it's unlikely we'll go extinct, and you can't imagine a future so advanced they wouldn't be curious about us, well then logic kind of pushes you, uncomfortably, toward that third, mind-bending conclusion.
You see, the whole thing just becomes a numbers game. I mean, if a post-human civilization can run thousands, or heck, maybe millions of these incredibly realistic ancestor simulations, then the number of simulated people and simulated worlds would just dwarf the single original base reality. So, by simple odds, you're far, far more likely to be one of the countless simulated minds than one of the original real ones. But, okay, this is where a really powerful counter-argument comes into play. It kind of shifts the whole question. It's not just, could we be in a simulation, but should anyone even create one in the first place? And this is where the ethics of it all get really thorny. An analyst named Rick Searle brings up this profound moral problem. He makes a really good point. Any civilization advanced enough to do this would have almost certainly conquered the biggest sources of suffering in their own lives. Things like disease, systemic pain, involuntary death. So to then turn around and create a simulation that deliberately puts all of those horrors back in, that's a deeply, deeply questionable act.
And this is where the dilemma just hits you right in the face. Look at the contrast. The simulators, they're living in a utopia they built for themselves. But they're deliberately programming a world for us, the simulated, that is defined by the exact suffering they worked so hard to escape. It brings up that ancient problem of evil, right? How can a good, all-powerful creator allow for so much pain?
Now, to make this really concrete, Searle draws an analogy to our own rules for animal experimentation. In the US, for instance, we have these committees. They're called the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, or ISA's UC. And their whole job is to make sure research is justified and that we never ever inflict unnecessary burdens on living subjects. The takeaway here is simple. Even our own imperfect pursuit of knowledge has ethical guardrails.
So he argues, what if you put an ancestor simulation up against our own ethical tests? Well, it would likely fail, big time. Couldn't you learn about history with models that don't actually feel pain? What piece of knowledge is so important that it justifies creating beings who actually feel the horror of war or a plague? And, at its core, how could it ever be considered humane to design a world full of suffering that you yourself got to escape?
And this leads to a pretty powerful conclusion. If we are in an ancestor simulation, then by our own standards, its creators are ethically blind. Or worse, they're running an experiment that is fundamentally inhumane. And maybe, just maybe, this ethical barrier is the real reason why Bostrom's second proposition, that post-humans just aren't interested in running these things, is actually the true one.
But what if we've been asking the wrong question this whole time? What if this entire premise of an external simulator, some programmer in another universe, is just wrong? This is where we get into a radical new way of thinking that reframes the whole question.
This is called the self-simulation hypothesis, and it proposes a reality that doesn't need an external computer or a programmer because, well, it simulates itself. So instead of our world being a fake copy of a real world, our reality is more like a grand thought that the universe is thinking. And you can see a key difference here. Most ways of thinking about reality, whether it's materialism or digital physics, they kind of hit a wall when it comes to the origin question. The fundamental stuff, whether it's matter or information, just is. But the self-simulation hypothesis, on the bottom there, that's different.
It actually tries to give us a logically consistent origin story for reality itself.
Now, to get our heads around this, we first have to understand what the simulation is running on. And the hypothesis is built on this idea of pan-consciousness. Think of it like this. The entire universe is, at its most basic level, a single unified mind. And everything we see, everything we experience, from galaxies to quarks, is just a form of thought happening inside that universal consciousness.
And this is a brilliant way to picture how it works. Reality isn't a straight line from past to future. It's what's known as a strange loop. It's a bit like the chicken and the egg problem, but on a cosmic scale. The universal mind thinks its code into existence. That code evolves into conscious beings like you and me, and then our collective consciousness becomes the universal mind. It's a self-creating cycle that exists outside of how we perceive time.
So if we put that all together, the universe isn't a simulation being run on a computer. It's a mental simulation being run by a universal mind, which is itself the result of that very simulation. It's just one grand, self-creating thought.
Okay, so where do we fit into all this? This is where it gets really, really interesting, because this hypothesis gives our own consciousness a crucial, active role to play. We are not just passive characters watching the story unfold.
In this model, your subjective experience, your choices, your awareness, your ideas, that's all defined as emergent consciousness, or EC for short. And this EC, it isn't just some random byproduct of your brain chemistry. No, it's a real, causal form of information. Our thoughts aren't just about reality, they are an active ingredient in reality.
So what does that mean? It means that by observing, by measuring, by making choices, we are feeding new information back into the universal mind. We're kind of like a distributed thinking network for this cosmic consciousness. Our choices literally help to write the syntax of reality from one moment to the next.
And all this leaves us with two profoundly different ways to think about this whole simulation question. And each one has completely different implications for our place in the cosmos.
Look at the difference here. On the one hand, the ancestor simulation paints us as passive subjects in a lab, maybe even part of a cruel experiment, living a fake reality. The self-simulation model, on the other hand, reframes us completely. We are active, essential participants in a real mental reality. We are co-creators. And in this view, suffering isn't some cruelty inflicted on us, but maybe an integrated part of a universe that is learning and organizing itself.
And this brings us to the ultimate takeaway. The self-simulation hypothesis doesn't just try to explain reality, it hands us a profound responsibility. Because if our choices, our focus, our observations actually help to write the code of the universe, then we are not just living in the world, we are helping to create it. And that leaves us with a very powerful, very personal question. What kind of reality will you choose to build?